Yep, Chris Roberts, advisor for Onyxia and Chief Information Security Officer at a variety of different places. So I think when we start looking at top challenges in the industry, a lot of it comes down to data. When we start taking a look at how we process information, many years ago we had a little amount of information, we can make some very good informed decisions of it and bring out some intelligence. We take a step back today and we're overwhelmed with the volumes and the quantities of data that we have. So how do we make a more informed decision on that kind of data? And it can be anything. It can be everything from threat intelligence, everything from business intelligence, everything from technical knowledge, everything from indications of compromise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is literally finding that proverbial needle in a haystack and going, okay, how can I action that? If you take a step back and you look at the industry as a whole, and you look at a lot of us as a whole, we're under constant attack. And so understanding where to prioritize my time and my efforts, and then on another hand, understanding where to prioritize my financial responsibilities, let alone juggling the business aspect of things and going, hey, how do I now take what I see as technical and cybersecurity related issues and translate those to business issues? There is so much that we have to do around data and analytics that having a platform that helps me understand not just what's coming in and what's coming at me, but how is my current technology performing? How are my current vendors and suppliers performing? As I start looking at endpoint detection and systems and network and integrity and data detection, all these other areas I have to deal with, having something that helps me understand what's going on in the context of what I have to deal with is invaluable. So I really appreciate it that way. So I think when you start taking a look at what tools we have in front of us, what technologies we have in front of us, it comes down to a single word, which is accountability. It comes down to, at the end of the day, as a CISO, I really have one single job, and that is to protect the organization. It is to look at the individuals inside it, it's to look at their friends, their families, everybody around it, and the organization as a whole. And if I can't understand how my systems are effectively working and how good they are, I don't have that accountability. As I go talk to the board of directors, and we talk about where we are, where we're going, where we need to be, and what the journey in cybersecurity is. If I can't place metrics on that, if I can't actually take very, very concrete examples as to what's happening inside the organization and relate those in such a way that the board understands them, I don't have that accountability to them to help them understand where we need to go. And the same thing with the vendors. Unfortunately in our industry, there's a lot of over-promising and under-delivering. And so holding vendors, suppliers, third parties accountable to what they promised versus what they delivered versus what our expectations are, to me that's key, because then I can take all of that, I can disseminate it to the business, my peers across other areas, and we can all sit down and go, how do we move forward? So metrics have changed over the years. Unfortunately, I came into the industry when we counted how many attacks we had against our firewalls. And unfortunately, today I still hear hey, how many attacks are we having to repel? And I'm like, oh, not the best of metrics. I think there's a number of different areas. And I think, again, it comes down to businesses. It comes down to, as a CISO and as leaders in technology, it's our job to sit with the business and understand the business's requirements. Is it more a fiscal responsibility? Is it more manufacturing, a technical? Is it intellectual property? How are we performing within what the business's context is? We start taking a look at a healthcare environment, and as I'm having conversations with healthcare, it's a very different conversation I'd have with a financial organization as to how we hold ourselves accountable. So the nice thing, again, with something like the Onyxia platform is we have the ability to adjust those metrics on an organization by organization basis. At the end of the day, a lot of it comes down, again, back to that accountability conversation. When the board says, how are we doing? Have we understood the risks? And have we understood the probability of those risks occurring, and how are we reducing the probability? Because risk always exists. And I think that's one of the things. Anybody that comes in and says, I'll eliminate risk is fooling themselves and others. But if I understand the risks and I can help the board and leaders and everybody else in my peer group understand how we're managing those risks and the probability of those risks occurring, that's probably one of the biggest metrics we need to look at. I think when we go before the board or advisory board or any other leader in the business, we have to talk their language. We've spent too many years walking in and expecting people to understand us, and it's failed spectacularly. Absolutely amazingly, we've failed. So a lot of the times we've really got to go in and do a bit of a mea culpa. I've worked in too many organizations where the network team doesn't talk to the security team, don't talk to the DBAs, and nobody talks to the engineers, and goodness knows we don't want to talk to the business. That's got to stop. We have to go and talk their language. So it's absolutely nothing to do with the technology. It's all to do with communication and collaboration. It is walking into those board level conversations, but it's walking in with the knowledge as to what they expect. So, last couple of boards I've worked with, I've sat down beforehand, sat down with either the board president or, quite honestly, the chief of staff to the boards who understand how these work, and gone, hey, what do they care about? What do they focus on? What's the individual people on the board? How do they care? How do they interact? And I mean, we're social engineers at the end of the day. That's part of our job. So it's how do I engineer it in such a way that they will become comfortable with the message, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, and it's done in a way that they understand it. I don't just walk in a comfort way, blind them with stats and metrics. You have to make it tangible. So it's definitely stripping the technology out of it and having the business conversation. So I think the SEC rules are an interesting response to what the CISOs and leaders have been clamoring for, which is more accountability, more responsibility. That in itself is fantastic, but in some ways we ourselves have to also be able to enact upon what we see and what we do. And there's still some work to be done on that one. As a CISO, and advice to other CISOs would be, for a moment, take a step back and go, this is what the SEC is looking for, this is what regulatory compliance, legal fiduciary requires of me. How able am I to hold my organization to these rules and regulations? I just did this several months ago, and I ended up building a risk register. A lot of companies have it, a lot of companies think about it, but when you sit down and you actually list out the risks, and then you have the conversations with legal, governance, compliance, and the other teams and go, hey, here's where we're at, you get a good baseline as to where we think we are versus where we are. And I think the advice for newer CISOs is to really take a step back and go, how much am I willing to accept this journey inside the organization I'm in? How much is the organization willing to actually buy into what we need to do? And if they're not, how do I actually protect myself and the organization? Because we had a fantastic conversation the other evening about this one where we talked about individual liability, personal liability, directors and officers insurance. So as a CISO, it isn't just walking in and negotiating your salary and your compensation. It's now walking in and going, hey, if I am being held accountable, what protections are in place if everybody else doesn't do their job? Because at the end of the day, the accountability falls on my shoulders, but if other people are not enabled to do their jobs, or they just flat out don't have the incentives to do them, how do I gain that protection? How do I enable them to work? So there's a few things to work on. So ROI is an interesting one because, again, it so depends upon so many different factors. But for me, again, it's looking at the tools and technology we've implemented, and it's turning around and saying, hey, let's take endpoint. Endpoint is a hot one, especially when you take augmented or artificial intelligence into playing. There's so many expectations. Sit down with the vendor, the supplier, the manufacturer, and go, what are you seeing? How are you expecting this to behave in my environment? And then baselining it. And then as it's implemented, as it's integrated, having a tool or a technology, again, the Onyxia side of things comes into play now, because I can very easily and very quickly look across my entire ecosphere and go, I see this performing, I see this outperforming, I see this underperforming. So you can very quickly look across the entire stack of technology that you have and go, how are these working based on the conversations I've had with the vendors. I think that's probably one thing as a CISO, and unfortunately leaders in technology, we've gone out and we've bought things. We haven't asked all the necessary questions we should have done of the vendor. It's a failing on our part, unfortunately. The vendor's gone in and said, we'll solve all of the world's problems for you, and they've only solved this much. So I think that's one of those things where that accountability, but doing it with the metrics, and again, having a decent platform that gives me that is fantastic, because now I can go, this is what you told me, this is what I see, and here are the numbers to bring that up. Now, what are we going to do about this? Ooh, AI, artificial or augmented intelligence. That's a melting pot of all sorts of things, isn't it? I think a number of different things. There is so much potential out there to help sift through data. And if you look at, you take data, you build information, and from that you have intelligence and actionable intelligence. That can be a very manual process. I mean, you're taking literally trying to boil the ocean into literally a cup of tea. As a human, we can't do that anymore. We're just generating so much data. So using an augmented or an artificial intelligence, either from a narrow perspective or very general perspective, and going, hey, give me what I need to understand out of this pool and use it effectively. That, I think, is where I see it. It's almost that second set of eyes. It's not having it take over, it's using it as a tool to more effectively and efficiently understand what's coming at us. Now, I want two of them. I want the one to tell me what's coming at me, and I want one over here to help me understand that this one isn't lying to me. So I want my information, but I want my who's watching the watchers mentality. I want this one over here to make sure it's not being lied to. So I like this one. This is honestly part of the reason I'm sitting here, and it's part of the reason that it's been fantastic working with Savannah and the team. And I remember one of the very first conversations we had, which is like, look, when I wake up in the morning, I need to know very quickly whether I can wake up quietly and sensibly, have a cup of tea and have breakfast, or whether my ass is going to have to get out of bed on fire and respond to something. So typically my first port of call is the BBC. This is one of the most neutral that we can possibly get to news media outlets out there-ish. I look at the BBC and see how much of the world is on fire, and if it's changed overnight, great. The world is okay as it can be. Then the next thing I used to do at a number of places is I would have the teams that worked with me, I would have them report out, how's everything doing, how's it doing overnight, give me the morning, noon, and evening stats. I'd look at those and go, okay, I can get up leisurely, or I'm gonna have to get up really quickly and deal with firefighting or whatever the leadership want to know. The nice thing about a platform with Onyxia is now I basically have all of that. I have the ability to look at my BBC, and then I can look at the Onyxia platform and go, okay, I can actually crash out for a little bit longer. I can actually have a nice civilized wake up in the morning. So it's having that information to hand. It's having, when the CEO calls up, or when the CFO calls and goes, oh, did you see the news this morning about da-da-da-da-da, and how are we dealing with this? It's being able to very quickly react to that in a meaningful way and give them the information that they want, give them the comfort, or turn around to them and say, hey, we haven't addressed this. Here's our plan to deal with it. And so it's really nice to have the detection side of it come in, have me understanding as to where our organization is. You know, indicators of compromise is another one. When somebody comes up and says, oh my gosh, you know, this poor vendor over here has gotten themselves beaten up again, and all of these products are now, you know, have issues with them. Very quickly be able to go to the platform and go, okay, how are we from a risk perspective? Do we have other issues? Do I have to reprioritize teams? Can I do something? So it's a very, very good tactical platform to help me understand what the teams need to do next. But it's also a really nice strategic platform that I can use to tell the story to leadership as to where we're going and how we're doing.